My name's Doug Jarvis. I'm an artist and curator based in Victoria, British Columbia. And at the moment, I'm currently the program coordinator at Open Space, the Artist Run Center in Victoria, and I'm the Artist in Residence Fellow at the Center for Studies in Religion and Society up at the university. It's an interdisciplinary center, which is quite an interesting place, I have to say. Lots of good discussions.
I'm Ted Hiebert. I'm an artist, writer, curator. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Washington, Bothell. I teach in the Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences program.
Well, Ted and I met in Victoria through Open Space. We were both kind of on the board there for a few years, but also just kind of hanging out, having conversations.
The collective itself as Noxious Sector really started with three of us. So it was Doug and I, and it was our friend Jackson Two Bears. And so we've done a number of projects together, but Noxious Sector is conceived of as a really sort of informal coming together of people, so it's not always all of us involved in the projects. Well, our interest in the paranormal is really generated from a number of different angles. Doug and I think, come at the question from different perspectives, which always, I think, turns into interesting versions of the story. So we'll quite often not agree on whether we believe or don't believe, or how skeptical we want to approach the project. So there's a lot of negotiation just in terms of how we approach the concept of the paranormal. And then in each instance, we just try and trouble each other's sort of biases and beliefs in ways that hopefully prove interesting. This exhibition really came out of a whole series of conversations that Doug and I had on topics ranging from art to philosophy to strange science, quantum physics especially.
Well, again, the shared interest in Alfred Jarry and his pataphysics, and exploring that and reading the book and just kind of using it as a curiosity and thinking, okay, what does it mean to actually engage with this, of the science of imaginary solutions? And so working with that and kind of discussing that became well, how could we involve him in a project? And Ted can talk about the time machine and Jarry's time machine, and that being an interesting kind of proposal.
Well, it's a point of departure for us, because Jarry, the book that kind of brought Doug and I together was the Exploits and Opinions of Dr. Proulx, pataphysician. And this is the book where Jarry outlines pataphysics. He defines it as a science of imaginary solutions on one hand, and as a study of exceptions on the other hand. Really looking for approaches to the impossible in lots of ways. And so we did a little bit of digging and found that Jarry himself had played around with this on more than one occasion. One of the texts that we particularly liked was a text on how to build a time machine, which is a very dense text, and sort of compelling in certain ways and sort of alienating in other ways, but it speaks with such authority that even in his time, this was the early 20th century, in his time, scientists took the time to make sure he wasn't onto something. So it was just strange enough that it seemed plausible, right? So for me, I have a real interest in aesthetic theory, and as soon as we start to talk about things like plausible impossibility, well, this is Aristotle's formulation for aesthetics. This is what Aristotle says art does. Art makes the impossible seem plausible. And so, these sort of nice intermixings of art and science seem to really resonate with other conversations about quantum physics, where increasingly, the science of understanding the world itself has been opened to uncertainty in profound ways. The only thing quantum physics knows for sure is that it doesn't really know anything all that well. So these interesting fluctuations where, science itself is forced to imagine solutions to problems because they don't know the answer. So, science itself has become almost a process of imaginary solutions, a nice full circle with art.
And this year, apparently, in British Columbia is the Year of Science. So I thought, well, this is a nice kind of way to engage with that topic and, explore the kind of the relationship between art and science. Well, Ted and I are both artists ourselves, and so we have our own personal practices, which lends nicely to our collaboration on many levels. So for myself, it's an interesting way to kind of approach this project in particular, kind of imagining, well, what does an artist go through, and what are the curiosities or the problematics that you approaching something. So the idea of putting out a call and around the idea of impossibilities really is intriguing, because it makes you kind of wonder and question, well, what are you doing, and what is possible, or what is real? That's a nice way to kind of challenge that and explore it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the challenges in dealing with imaginary solutions is how do you define such a thing? When you're interested in the impossible, how can you start to define it without at the same time rendering it possible? So one of the easiest ways is through strategies like absurdity or nonsense, to start to come up with versions of the story that trouble a simple reality. And so that's what we started trying to do, is trying to find frames, frames for absurdity, frames for nonsense, frames which would challenge other people to sort of go into some of these questions that we were looking at in their own ways. So we phrased it, the title for the show, More Often Than Always, Less Often Than Never, comes directly out of one of these types of frames, looking at probability theory, which defines possibility as a number between 0 and 1, right? Anything greater than 1 is discounted as something that would happen in terms of probability more often than always, sort of an impossible redundancy. And on the other end, anything with a probability of less than 0 would happen less often than never. And of course, never is as infrequent as something can happen, so to have something even less often. But this was the challenge that we put to artists. And so from my perspective, each artist in the show has really come up with their own kind of poetic response to this challenge.
I think we were pleasantly surprised to receive over 100 submissions from all over the world. It kind of breaks down into different kinds of proposals, and
but really the biggest surprises are the ones in the show.
The ones that kind of captured our imagination and kept our attention, and that not always resolving themselves too quickly. And that's kind of what we found working on these projects, that it's the ones that kind of we can't quite place just yet, and they kind of keep moving along, that we find will settle into a show as we have going on here.
Yeah, our curatorial process is a little bit irreverent, I guess. We've been accused of being outright sort of critical, but it's never been our goal to challenge the integrity of curation. We don't find that kind of aggression very interesting, actually. We're much more interested, though, in being self-reflexive with our curatorial strategies. So we quite often will look for ways to implicate ourselves in the questions we're asking. And that typically takes the form of a curatorial invention or intervention of one sort or another.
And so with this show, we engaged Alfred Jarry, and through a series of seances, kind of communicating with him and collaborating with him, and the process of communicating with him as an element and a way to, help us choose the final works for the show.
It seemed like a nice thing to do, really. I mean, the concept for the show came out of our discussions about Alfred Jarry. So the idea of trying to fold him back into the discussion seemed really appealing. It also has a really nice moment of resonance with, his manual for how to build a time machine. We sort of think of the Ouija board itself as a bit of a time machine. And so that was kind of our attempt to recover some of that. I think an exhibition like this is really about questions more than it is about answers. And I think that, an inquiring and curious mind is probably going to get the most out of the work, I suppose, in some ways. Because the work isn't here to tell anybody anything. The work is here as a response to a challenge, and I think as a reciprocal challenge as well. And these are artists who have put their imaginations to use in what we find to be really interesting and compelling ways. And it isn't so much about making a point as it is just opening a space for the imagination, in the everyday world. I'd just really like to end by saying thank you, because this has been a really tremendous opportunity for us, and we really enjoyed, seeing the work of the artists, but we've also really enjoyed the collaborative process with the gallery. We're really grateful to have had the chance to put this show together.
Yes, thank you.